The Public Education Defense Project presents this inspiring and thought-provoking video series featuring Jamie Vollmer. Jamie is a nationally recognized champion of public education. Not an educator by profession, he entered the field after careers in law and manufacturing. Once a harsh critic, he has become an articulate friend of America's public schools. He received the Learning and Liberty Award from the National School Public Relations Association for his work in building school-community partnerships. His book, Schools Cannot Do It Alone, was proclaimed one of the top 10 books of the year by the American School Board Journal. Over the last 29 years, he has helped educators and the people of their communities work together to increase student success. We hope you find this series informative, entertaining, and useful. Welcome to the Great Conversation.
America's public schools are teaching more students in more subjects to higher levels than ever before. 51 million. 5 million more than the peak of the baby boom. This great flood of young people is the most diverse, demanding, and by far the most distracted generation of students the world has ever seen. Many are consumed by a popular culture that distorts reality and breeds a dangerously overdeveloped sense of entitlement. We've reached a point where all of them must graduate, prepared to thrive and prosper in a complex global society. But public attitudes towards learning reinforce a system rooted in an old model, one designed to select and sort young people for an industrial America that no longer exists. And every year, we, through our elected officials, compound the problem by dumping more social, psychological, and medical problems on their doorstep to fix. For most of the people working inside our public schools, a 40-hour week is nothing. 50 hours, 60 hours is routine. But no matter how hard they work, they cannot do it alone. Now is the time for all Americans to come together, bound by a deep understanding of our common interests, and help our schools unfold the full potential of every child. It's moral, it's practical, and it's the most important enterprise of our time.
It's The Great Conversation with Jamie Vollmer, helping to increase public support for America's public schools.
Hello, and welcome to The Great Conversation. I'm Jamie Vollmer, and I'm excited. This is the first in a series of programs designed to accomplish two goals. First, to provide information, commentary, and stories that help to increase public support for both public education and for the millions of people who work inside our public schools. No generation of teachers and administrators in the history of the world has had to deal with the challenges they face. They deserve all the support they can get. Second, I seek to encourage and help individuals and groups across the country engage in their own great conversations. Formal and informal discussions with your family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, elected officials. Conversations that result in community-wide efforts to create schools that help all children get the education they need to thrive and prosper as adults. With these two goals in mind, I will strive to be honest and accurate. But let's be perfectly clear. I've got no intention of being fair and balanced. The Great Conversation is pro-public education. Public education has unleashed the creative genius of tens of millions of Americans, both privileged and disenfranchised. Public schools made our democracy possible and powered our ascent to global preeminence. For almost 200 years, Americans have pursued publicly funded, equal educational opportunity for all. And even though it's true, there's much left to do. the return on our investment has been glorious. I've been actively promoting public education for 28 years. I have no intention of changing here. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. There are already so many people in the media, in politics, in the private sector, who praise our teachers and administrators and defend public education every day. Well, I reckon it can't hurt to add my voice. Everybody who works inside of a school and all of the allies in the community must stand up, speak out, push back against this viral negativity. The stakes are much too high to remain silent. Now, it's true, as many of you have told me, there have always been critics of public schools. And as a matter of fact, in the book, Schools Cannot Do It Alone, I included a list in Chapter 11 of critical comments that goes back 135 years to 1880, when the most eminent Richard Grant White, sporting a spectacular facial coiffure, wrote a scathing indictment in the North American Review entitled "The Public School Failure." I accept that there have always been critics. But over the last 33 years, attacking our schools has become a blood sport. I use 33 years as a reference point because it corresponds with the release of the federal report, A Nation at Risk. As many of you know, this report was written during the first Reagan administration in response to the growing fear that the American educational establishment was failing to produce a globally competitive workforce. I have read and reread A Nation at Risk over the years, and given the context, I find it quite reasonable. It contains sound recommendations regarding curriculum, teaching, the allocation of time, and almost none of that was reported by the press. Instead, what got all the ink and airtime was the sensational language of the executive summary. In order to capture the media and therefore public attention, the authors front-end loaded phrases like act of war, squandered gains, unilateral educational disarmament, and of course the most famous line, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and a people. Very scary stuff. Now, I'll leave it to the experts to say whether or not A Nation at Risk did anything to advance the cause of reform. From my lay perspective, however, two things are clear. First, much like the phony fear-mongering that surrounds our schools today, the historical record suggests that the situation then may not have been as dire as we were led to believe, at least regarding the future of our economy. For example, the high school graduates of 1983 are now entering their 50s. And the kindergartners of that year, these kids are now 38 years old. Since over 80% of America's workers are the products of public school, this means that the heart of the American workforce is now, and has been for some time, comprised of these unfortunates who were captives of America's so-called educational decline. The very kids who were going to be slaughtered in the global economy. But instead of being trounced by their international competitors, rather than putting our future at risk, over the last 3 decades, tens of millions of public school graduates have helped America become the world's greatest power. They launched a spectacular technological revolution. They consistently outperformed their Asian and European counterparts, the very people who've been killing us on standardized tests since 1964. And their hard work creativity, and ambition propelled a rise in our standard of living, the likes of which the world has never seen. And when it comes to the stock market since 1983, America has witnessed a tremendous, unprecedented rise in the broad indices. A rise that was nearly uninterrupted until the gut-wrenching crash of 2008, a collapse that took us to the very brink of global financial catastrophe, which we now know was largely caused by the irresponsible, arguably criminal actions of America's too-big-to-fail bankers, the masters of the universe on Wall Street, and their enablers in Washington, D.C., almost all of whom are graduates of where? Private schools! We'll be back.
Each episode of The Great Conversation provides opportunities to discuss some of the issues Jamie has raised. In Section 1, we've presented with the series two major goals. First, to increase public support for public education and for the people who work inside our schools. Second, to encourage communities to work together to help all students get the education they need to thrive and prosper as adults. Regarding goal number 1, the first question is, do you think substantially increasing public support for our schools is possible? And if so, why? Question number 2 is, what benefits, if any, would accrue from working together to accomplish this goal? To educators, to students, to the community at large. As for goal number 2, what role can a community play to help increase student success in the 21st century? Press pause if you would like to consider these questions now. Otherwise, continue to Section 2.
Welcome back to The Great Conversation, where I was attempting to make the case, not for the last time in this series, that educators and their allies must work together to increase public support for public education for multiple reasons. Which brings us to the second thing we can say about the release of A Nation at Risk, beyond its specious predictions about our economic future. The language that was used unleashed a flood of negativity that continues to this very day. You see it, for example, in our media and politics. Headlines flash half-truths. False comparisons are made between the past and the present, public versus private, us against them. Schools are blamed for social ills over which they have little control. Critics in high places report test results in the worst possible light. They accuse their teachers and administrators of being overpaid, overprotected, impediments to change, the cause of their state budget woes. They employ the language of blame and punishment, even as they're insisting that their state must win the war for global educational supremacy. I gotta tell you, what kind of a leader belittles his troops, destroys their morale, and starves them of resources while they're struggling on the battlefield? Certainly not one who expects to win. And the kicker is, for all their talk, you and I know none of them would survive a week in a classroom. Shut up! Many of these attacks are based upon the unfounded conviction that we have a people problem. Teachers and administrators are lazy and incompetent, more interested in their paychecks and benefits than in their students. Now let me be perfectly clear. We do not have a people problem. Are there people working inside our schools who should no longer be in their jobs? Absolutely. Don't stand up. Everybody knows who you are. But the percentage of these people is no greater than the percentage of lawyers, doctors, accountants, policemen, engineers, and politicians who shouldn't be in their jobs. There is no great mass of deadwood inside of America's classrooms, and I challenge anyone who thinks otherwise to put your body on the line and spend a day inside of a public school. I'm not talking about some hands in your pocket, stand at the back of the class, VIP walking tour. I mean a real working day. How about as a teacher's aide?
No, please no.
What you will see is that the vast, vast majority of people in our schools is working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to fulfill an array of academic, social, and medical responsibilities that no generation of educators has ever had to face. It's easy to sit back and say, "What's the matter with these people? How come they can't teach these kids?" But it's been decades since the task was that simple. Economic dislocation, widespread family dysfunction, rapid social and technological change, and a seemingly unending stream of intrusive government regulations have combined to completely change the game. The mandate is no longer teach our students, it's raise our kids. And week in and week out, millions of America's teachers, administrators, and support staff dance as fast as they can to meet this unprecedented challenge. We don't have a people problem. What we have is a system problem. Our educators are working inside a time-constant learning variable system that was designed to select and sort students for an agri-industrial America that no longer exists. But instead of facilitating systemic change, rather than working to remove the deep-seated cultural and structural obstacles to student achievement, the people problem crowd in government and the media is convinced we will get the graduates we need if we can just hold our educators accountable. And the accountability instruments they have chosen are standardized tests. State and federal policymakers have trapped America's students, parents, teachers, and administrators in an avalanche of standardized tests. Tests that by their very nature narrow the curriculum. Tests rife with bias. Tests that, ironically, few of our international competitors would ever use, especially to reward or punish teachers and administrators. And perhaps most troubling, blunt instruments that marginalize most of the traits that have helped America become great, like honesty, loyalty, curiosity, perseverance, ingenuity, creativity, virtue, courage, and love of family and country. Traits that we think are most important qualities in our children and ourselves. It especially boggles my mind to see people who identify themselves as conservatives so aggressively pushing these tests. They extol the importance of traditional American values, and they lament their decline. They accurately identify these traits as the basis of America's success in the world, but then, in some gross example of a cultural disconnect, they push tests that neither measure, encourage, nor develop any of these traits in America's children. Unless you're talking about developing the perseverance to sit through one more test. Look, when it comes to educating America's youth, I know that our leaders on the left and the right understand that the stakes are very high. But in their attempt to find a fix, and for some because they want to punish the teachers' unions, They have chosen to gamble our future on a simplistic, punitive reform agenda that costs us billions of dollars and cannot deliver the results we need. It is worth noting that many of these tough talk accountability laws are promoted and sometimes entirely written by out-of-state lobbyists for-profit educational management organizations and their allies, who haunt the halls of our state capitol, throwing around free market reform rhetoric and campaign contributions to support their self-serving agendas. These people do not see America's public schools as essential components of our remarkable participatory democracy. They see them as cash cows waiting to be milked. We'll be back.
In this section, Jamie linked the negative tone of a nation at risk to the actions and rhetoric of some of America's elected officials, particularly those who claim that complacent, self-interested teachers and administrators are the problem. He asserted that there is no widespread people problem, but to those who believe there is, he issued a challenge: spend an entire day working inside a public school. Since the cost of public education is the largest line item in every state budget, our first question is this: should every legislator be required to spend a day working inside a public school once every budget cycle? How would we structure the day for maximum impact? What would be the benefits, if any? Press pause if you would like to consider these questions now. Otherwise, continue to section 3.
Welcome back. We have reached the halfway point in our analysis of the negativity that threatens to both delegitimize public education and weaken our communities. So far, I focused primarily on people in 3 groups who are caught in the destructive current, but they are not alone. There are business leaders who advocate punitive, top-down reforms that they would never adopt in their own companies. And of course, there's that lovely group of self-dealers, hypocrites, and anarchists who call themselves America's true school reformers. We're going to get to all those folks, but not now. Today, I want to end on a more upbeat note by introducing a segment that we call What Can We Do Now? We are always on the lookout for things you can do to increase community-wide support for your schools. We're especially keen to share practical steps you can take in the course of your own great conversations at little or no cost. To that end, we are going to open, for the first time, the Great Conversation Field Guide. And there is no better person to help us than our senior field correspondent and lifelong teacher, Tina Edlin, who I'm told has something she cannot wait to share. Tina, what have you got?
Thanks, Jamie. It's that time of year when schools across America disgorge their kiddos into the streets of their communities for the long summer break. And right behind them, shell-shocked teachers and administrators stumble out into the light, realize another year has flashed before their eyes, and ask one another, what the heck happened? And from coast to coast, if those empty schools are typical, they have some sort of marquee out in the front broadcasting the message, have a great summer. I hate that. There's nothing wrong with saying have a great summer or a safe summer, or if you're awash in helicopter parents, have an intellectually challenging summer. But these things should stay up only for 1 week, maybe 10 days. Over the course of the summer break, hundreds, maybe thousands of eyeballs will see your signs. For heaven's sake, tell them something. Give the public some sense of the scope of what you do. How many miles a year do your bus drivers safely transport the children of your community? Thousands, tens of thousands. How many meals do you serve? In most places, more than all the restaurants in the community combined. How many pounds of cheese did you buy? How many doses of medicine did you administer? How many dollars did your average teacher spend on supplies out of her own pocket? Here's a fun fact. Public school teachers as a group give more of their time than any other professional or employee group in your town. How many of your neighbors know any of this? The answer is not enough. The vast majority of people living in your community have no children in school. Most haven't stepped foot inside your halls for anything other than a sporting event or student performance in decades. For most of the people you depend upon for support, your efforts are out of sight, out of mind. And to make matters worse, there are knuckle-dragging Neanderthals on the TV and radio lying to them and doing their best to marginalize your efforts. Public schools and their employees make an immense contribution to the health and well-being of their communities. And people need to know it. Use your signs as part of your great conversation. Tell your story. Come on, tell it. You have the letters.
Thanks, Tina. Nice job. This brings us to the end of our first episode. And as we close, I want to leave you with this. At its heart, public education is an idea. Equal educational opportunity for all, publicly funded, locally governed, and supported. As individuals and as a group, you have the power to defend and nourish this idea. I've seen it. Over the last 28 years, I've been privileged to spend hundreds of hours inside public schools. I've worked with tens of thousands of people on the front line. And I know you're a great army. You're the largest employee group in almost every community in this country. And if you choose now to stand up and exercise your power, then despite all the insanity surrounding our schools, this is public education's most hopeful time. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again soon.
Your final question of the day is, in addition to school marquees, are there other district assets that can be employed at little or no cost to communicate with the public? Please note that this conversation is ongoing at our website.